Hello and welcome to the Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm your host, Macy Renee, and we are going on a journey together, my friend. If you've been looking for a podcast geared towards your growth, self-awareness, navigating your brain's daily mind drama, and deep inner work to become your highest and best self, you are in the perfect place. Let's get started. Good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm your host, Macy Renee, and I'm so excited to have you back. So before we get started today, I just want to remind you guys, if you listen to this podcast as an iTunes listener and you have never left a review, if you could go do that for me, I would be so forever grateful. It helps me stay on the ranks / get on the ranks so other people can find me when they're searching for personal development podcasts. So I really appreciate when you do that. And I love, again, when you connect with me. If you've never introduced yourself to me and you've been listening, find me on social media, send me a message and let me know that you found me through the podcast. I absolutely love connecting with you guys. So today we're going to talk about the freedom in living your truth. And I wanted to talk about this more in depth because I did a post about this on my Facebook in comparing what we call our solid self with our pseudo self. And we're going to get into what each of those mean, but ultimately it comes down to, are you living in your truth or are you just kind of existing and fitting in wherever you go, right? There's a difference. And one will feel very freeing and sometimes scary, and the other one will just begin to feel very exhausting. So let's talk about this today. So our solid self is like who we really are to our core. When we are being in our solid self, we show up exactly as we are. We don't feel the need to change ourselves, to water ourselves down, to say anything differently than how we would say it. And if we have maybe like 6 or 7 different groups of friends, right, and all of those friends are maybe a little bit different because all of our interests can be a little bit different, you are who you are in every single group. So you're not hanging out with maybe your more wealthy friends pretending that you're more wealthy, and you're not hanging out with your childhood friends, just talking about, childhood, and you're not with your political friends just, being all political. Like, when you're being your solid self, you know that no matter what group of friends you go around or who you're going around, you can be 110% authentically you. You can show up in sweatpants. You can show up however you want because you're not worried about what they're going to think about you, what they're going to say about you, if they're going to treat you differently because they're used to seeing you one way but not this other way. So if you find that you change yourself a little bit, or you water yourself down, or you're more quiet around certain groups, that would mean that you are in not your solid self. You're in what we call pseudo self. Okay. So your pseudo self is the person within you that really conforms, maybe not fully, but you have like little sneaky ways where, you're like, oh, around this group of people, I don't curse because they don't like that, whereas around my childhood friends, like, I'll just let it rip, right? Or you're like, well, around this group of people, I'm gonna dress this way because they probably would appreciate a little bit more modesty, but around my regular friends, like, I'll just be in sweatpants and a ball cap. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's sneaky and it feels very innocent in the moment that it's going on, and we just think like, how can I go around this group and be a little less me and a little bit more of what they're maybe expecting? And when we're doing that, we're watering ourselves down and we're not being our solid self. We're being this, pseudo self, where it's kind of like, if I don't engage in maybe how they want me to engage, or if I don't show up the way they would want me to show up, they're probably not going to like me, or they're not going to like us, or they're going to think this, or they're going to say these things, or they're going to think I'm rough around the edges, or they're going to think that I'm too much of this or not enough of this. And the way that you will know if you're being your pseudo self versus your solid self is if you feel very exhausted. If you call yourself an introvert, right? And you're like, you know what? I don't want to be around anybody but my group of best friends that have known me for all of my life. And why is that? Why can't you be around multiple groups of people? Well, if you're not being yourself, that takes additional work. If you're not showing up as your true, most authentic self, you're having to do so much extra work, expend so much extra energy to keep up with this story in your mind of what you think other people want from you. And maybe they've even said like about other people, like, yeah, I don't like so-and-so, they're too much, or I don't like so-and-so, they dress like this. And so you get these perceptions in your head that if you're really like that, but you're not showing that side of yourself, you start to feel like, well, they wouldn't like me if I was who I am. So I have to be this person. But do you hear it even saying that? Like even saying that, I just feel my throat starting to constrict and I feel suffocated because in whatever group of people that I'm around, I just want to be me. And I have to tell you guys that has been big work in my life, is being authentically and transparently me is what I wanted to say. And I'm like, wow, that grammar was horrible. Sorry, guys. But that is me, right? Like, I am not perfect. I'm not going to come on here all prim and proper all the time and know how to say all the right things. And I'm not going to spend 45 minutes cutting and editing and rewinding and deleting and coming back. I will just call out my own crap and be like, you know what? That sounded not so good. I'm so sorry. But that's me, and I even catch myself doing that in person. I will be like, oh my God, that grammar was horrible. I heard it after the fact. It was terrible. So I try to show up as exactly who I am and be very unapologetic, but it took me a very long time to be able to do that. Like when I would be around different people and feel like they wanted something different than who I felt I was at my core, like they want me to dress this way because they think this is more professional. And I shouldn't even say like the people around directly say to me, I want you to be this, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is in my mind, my stories were like, oh, they talk about people who do this. They don't know that I do this, and so they don't like this. So I'm not going to tell them that I do this, whatever the thing was, like that I dress this way, or that it could come down to, you guys, it comes down to like silly, stupid things like conversations about, I don't like whenever people don't, wear underwear with their leggings. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't wear underwear with my leggings. I'm being so vulnerable and disgusting right now, but that's the truth. And, whenever you find yourself, being like very, very quiet because they have clearly said that they don't like that, and you find yourself restricting and not being who you are, it begins to feel suffocating, even over tiny things like, oh shoot, they don't approve of people who don't wear underwear with leggings, and I'm that person. And I finally just got to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to own it. I'm just going to say it. Like, I'm just going to be me, because it is so exhausting and energetically draining to have to be a different version of myself with different groups of people, because that's who they expect or that's who they think I am. And so the more that I can lean into exactly who I am, even if that means admitting to something that they've clearly said that they don't like, well, it's up to them if they want to continue hanging out with me or not, right? Like you guys, love people for who they are, truly. I love people. I did a post about this on my Facebook quite some time ago, where I know the popular thing in the world is to be like, I hate people, or, I just don't want to be around anybody. I'm going to be a recluse. And, I laugh at memes like that, but deep in my core, truthfully, I love people. I love you no matter who you are and what you do. I don't always agree with every decision because I have my own beliefs and opinions, right? But I would consider myself someone very open to hearing what people of all different thoughts and beliefs have to say, because I'm always interested in learning and even challenging my own belief system. Because you think about it, like when we get into big arguments with other people, the reason that we fight to be right is because we have reinforced a thought so many times that it's become a belief. But just because we believe it and it's true for us doesn't mean it's actually true. It just means it's our belief. It's our most practiced thought. So when I'm around other people, I find it fascinating to be very curious about them, about what they do, about what they believe, about why maybe they are where they are, why they make the choices that they make. I just find being around people very fun and interesting. And because I love that, a long time ago would always felt like I had to be a certain person with one group, another person with another group. And I noticed this among different friends, even my husband, just feeling like he couldn't completely be who he is with every single group. And I see the toll that takes on everyone when they're not showing up authentically. When they're not showing up authentically, it feels emotionally draining. It feels energetically draining because you're not able to be who you are. And you're becoming this pseudo self, which is this persona, right, that other people expect from you or want you to be. And after a while, because that's not truly you, that becomes difficult to uphold. And the more that you engage in that kind of behavior of, I'm going to be this person for this, for this group, I'm going to be this person for this other group, and this person for this other group, it starts to get very confusing, and you lose yourself and you forget who you are, what you want, what your needs are, what you want to do. And I know from firsthand experience, it was just like, for me in my life, I was being everything to everybody else, and I was being whatever they needed me to be, because that made me, at the time, I thought, feel better. It made me feel like I was more in control. It made me feel like I could control the outcome, right? I just felt like, you know what? I don't even know who I am, but I can be everything to everybody else. And then I got to a point where I realized, oh my gosh, I'm drowning. I don't even know who I am. I don't even know what I want. I would tell my coach, I don't know up from down, left from right. I know nothing. I feel completely vulnerable and raw and naked. I don't even know who I am and what I even want in this lifetime. I have no idea what I want. And that began a lot of work for me when it came down to coaching and personal development, is learning how to be authentic and transparent, learning how to share more of my story. I have one heck of a story when it comes to my upbringing and my childhood and the things that I have gone through in my life. And I would even hold back on that because I felt like I needed to protect everybody else that was woven into my story. And that was exhausting as well. It was like, if I have to keep all these secrets my entire life just to make sure nobody else gets hurt. And so I have to be this way with this group, but this other group knows my story and knows who I am, and I feel most comfortable with them. But around this and this group and that group, I can't be who I am. And it gets very confusing to your own identity, because you're being the pseudo version of yourself, the false version of yourself. Jim Carrey talks about this. He talked about a spiritual mentor that he had, and this was life-changing for me, you guys. And the topic was depression. And he was talking about how he, in his own career and life, became very, very depressed. He was just like, I don't feel like people know me and who I am, because I don't even know who I am. People see Jim Carrey and they see this comedian and this, crazy guy that's done all of these comedies and, kind of crazy movies. And he said, but when I'm not being an actor, I'm very, very different from the role that I play. I'm so incredibly different. He's a very spiritual person. Some people think he's a nut, with the things that he says. I have to say I'm a Jim Carrey fan. I love his spiritual journey, because when I started identifying more with my solid self and not my pseudo self, I started having these deep spiritual experiences. And I realized that the reason I think people don't have their spiritual awakening or their spiritual experiences is because they're busy being their pseudo self of what everybody else needs from them, of what they think they need to be accepted, to be approved upon, even with their parents, right? Like you sometimes feel like you have to be a certain way, excuse me, for your parents to love and accept you for who you are, but that's not even who you are. So people fall in love with this version of you, your pseudo self, and it's not even your real self. So they don't even love you, right? You think that they do and you feel like they do, but they love the pseudo false version of you. And that's what begins to feel very exhausting because you're showing up as two different people for often several groups of people. But back to Jim Carrey, he talked about how he eventually got very, very depressed and he just felt down a lot. And one of his spiritual mentors said, if you break down that word depressed and you split it up, depressed is really just deep rest. And the way that he taught him is, you need deep rest from the persona that you're playing, from all of these roles that you're playing that are not you, and you know that they're not you, but you're showing up that way and you're being that role for everybody else. And that you need deep rest from that. So of course you're depressed, right? But why? You need deep rest from the persona you're playing. And when I thought about that, I that really hit me in my core, and I thought, why in the times in my life where I have been very depressed, it has always come down for me to feeling like I don't know who I am. I don't know who I want. I don't know what I want. I don't know any of that. And being in those lows of I don't know who I am, I don't know what I want, that is a very scary place to be. And I think that when you get to that point where you feel like you've hit rock bottom of not even knowing who you are or what you want, if you can lean into that rather than run away, it's the beginning of a humongous breakthrough. And through that journey, what I found is that when I was willing to lean into how depressed I was, not knowing who I was or what I wanted, I realized I have been a pseudo version of myself. I show up happy on social media, even though my home life with my family is terrible. That was the truth. It was all falling apart. It was literally like if you were to look me in the eyes, everything behind me was on fire, but you could look me in the eyes and I would smile and tell you everything was great. And it was exhausting, but it felt like, the stories in my head was like, what? I don't want to tell people what's really going on. I don't want them to feel sorry for me. I don't want the sympathy. I'm a big girl. I can handle it. I'm going to put on my big girl panties and handle it. I can carry the weight of the world on my own. I'd rather just smile. I need to be happy. I need to be positive. But the thing about it was I didn't actually feel that way. So the depression came from trying to be this positive persona of having it all together when really my world was falling apart and nobody knew it. And I felt like I couldn't share my story because there were people in my story I felt I needed to protect. I didn't want them to be seen as the bad guy. I didn't want people to hate them. I didn't want there to be judgment within my family. And I eventually got to the point where I said, you know what, this is heavy. I'm not showing up as my true self. Part of my true self is sharing my truthful story. And I have to learn how to do that without being afraid. And hence this podcast. I've told you guys things on the podcast I never, ever thought that I would repeat, simply because it might not be taken over well, or it might offend any family members that would listen and be like, oh my God, she's talking about me on the podcast. It's like, well, the actions that you had even 20 years ago or, close to 30 years ago have impacted me and have shaped my life. And I'm not going to be silent the rest of my life trying to protect someone who still makes crazy decisions sometimes, And it's been very freeing for me to just show up as who I am everywhere. Show up as who I am on my social media, show up as who I am on this podcast, show up as who I am when I meet a stranger in person, show up as who I am with every single group of friends that I have. I just am who I am. And I wasn't always like that. So if you have felt like you're stuck in your pseudo self, or you even currently feel like you're stuck in your pseudo self in some type of way, just know that you can shift that and you can transform and you can change that. And when the interesting and fun thing about it is when you're being your solid self, your true self, when people fall in love with that version of you, they're falling in love with the truest form of who you are. And that means you are authentically loved. You get exactly what you're wanting, versus when you're in your pseudo self, they're in love with that version of you. So when you start to grow and shift and change and they start to see a different version of you, right, from this pseudo self that you used as a protective mechanism to be liked and loved, it causes a lot of tension and they might not like that. And sometimes the breaking up with your pseudo self and coming into your solid self is a very scary thing. And I truly believe it takes consistent practice of showing up and just being who you are. On the flip side of this, something I've also had to practice is when I've been around people who've been in their pseudo self, and I love the pseudo self, but I didn't know it was their pseudo self. And they are becoming more of their solid self. I've had friends say I'm a completely different person and I'm just afraid of not being loved. And the work that I do with self-mastery, even for myself, and what I try to teach my clients is how to hold space for anyone, no matter what they're going through. And that means a practice for myself. When someone says, they're becoming more them than they've ever been, sometimes I miss the pseudo self, right? And I think that's very natural. It's like, oh, I kind of miss whenever they were this person, but they're trying to show me that they're being more them than they've ever been and that I'm getting the authentic version of them. Can I hold space for that? And when I'm not holding space for that, for them to be who they are, what thoughts am I having about it that I need to get in check? Like, that's my work, right? Now, if they completely change everything that they are, and that's totally their prerogative, that's totally fine. If that's what they do, and, it starts to not work, one, I'm going to be looking at my thoughts. Am I wishing that they were the old person? Because that's not productive. That's not actually who they were. So that can be my self-mastery work. But two, if it just doesn't align with my life, like maybe they, go down a deep, dark end that I just don't jive with, that's okay too. And I can make peace with that and set boundaries for my life, right? So the point of saying this is you're always in control. You have so much more control than you think, whether you're the one doing the shedding and going from pseudo self to solid self, or you have friends or family that are shedding who they've always been known as, and they're turning it into more of their solid self. You get to decide what you want your life experience to be, no matter what. And you have to keep that in the forefront of your mind, because a lot of times what we do is we become victims. Like, I want you to be this person because that makes me feel better. Remember, I did a podcast on this a few weeks ago. Who do you want other people to be so that you feel better, rather than doing the work of your own self-mastery to be able to hold space for anyone and then powerfully decide if you want them in your life or not and set boundaries, around that? There's a difference. And so you don't need anybody to be any specific way. If you're saying, I need so-and-so to be any kind of specific way to make me feel better, I want to let you know that that is your self-mastery work to do on yourself. You don't need anybody to be any certain way for you to feel good. You have to learn how to give that to yourself first, okay? When you have given that to yourself first, then you're practicing emotional intelligence, and then you can communicate with those other people in your life if you do feel like you need something or miss something or loved something that they do or did, kind of like your husband or your wife, and you're like, you know what, when we used to do XYZ, that used to feel really good to me. When you go to communicate that after you've done the self-mastery work on yourself first, the conversation is going to go so much better, because if you can learn how to give yourself what you need first, you're not going to have the same emotional explosions on them. And your response is not going to come from this needy, almost childlike place where it's like, I need you to be this so that I feel happy. I need you to be doing what I want you to be doing to be happy. Instead, you can be like, you know what? I make myself happy, but something that puts me in overdrive of joy is when you did XYZ. It made me feel so good. Maybe I'll do a podcast or a webinar or something on more emotional intelligence stuff, because it's so very important. But I really wanted you to hear a podcast based on really living your truth, you guys. Living your truth. Because you get one shot at this life, and are you going through your entire life being this version of yourself or different versions of yourself for different people? If you feel exhausted, if you are a people pleaser, think of where people pleasing comes from. People pleasing comes from a lot of times saying yes when you want to say no. If you're saying yes when you want to say no, you're probably in your pseudo self because you really wanted to say no. So sometimes it's very sneaky. It's like it shows up in different ways. It doesn't mean that you are night and day, but it can be sneaky things like, I wanted to say no to this thing, but then I had this thought, they're going to be mad if I say no, so I said yes. That's pseudo self. That is not the true version of yourself. The true version of yourself wanted to say no. And instead of you being your true version of yourself and honoring your no, no matter what the other person thought or said, you turned into your pseudo self of, I'm going to please this person because that's what they need, or that's what they wanted, or I wanted to be liked and loved. And I felt like I couldn't be me to be liked or loved. And think about that, guys. That's deep. I didn't think I could truthfully be me to be liked, loved, or approved of. Wow. Big work there, right? So if you are ready to do this work, what I would invite you to do is check out my Becoming Her program or my one-on-one coaching. If this is something that you would be interested in working on, becoming your most authentic self, your true self, my one-on-one coaching prices are raising October 1. So if you're interested in that, then just make sure you reach out to me prior to October 1. We can, discuss that. I do free 60-minute consults, you guys. So if there's anything that you are interested in, all you have to do is go to my website and there's a free 60-minute consult. There's no strings attached to that. That is literally for me to hear what's going on in your life and for you to open up about whatever is going on in your life and seeing if we are the right fit for each other to move forward. So you can do that for if you're interested in becoming her. You can do that if you're interested, in one-on-one coaching and you just want to even fill it out and see what it would be like. And if you think that I'm the right fit for you, if you're interested in taking it to the next step and doing, coaching for your own self-mastery work. So if you have any questions about that, please just let me know. You can check out more information on MacyRenee.com. And I will see you guys next week. Have a wonderful week, you guys. Hey girl, did you know there's a place for you to continue this work outside of the podcast? Well, there is, and it's called Becoming Her. This is my online and ongoing coaching container for self-mastery. Everything takes place online and is the best value for your investment if you're wanting to work with me. This is for women that want to create lasting change by learning how to master themselves, their energy, their mindset, and how to do the deep inner work. It's a growing community where you're supported for life with live online trainings, access to all previously recorded content, and 2 one-on-one coaching calls with me per month. It's an investment where you can rest assured you'll have everything you need at your fingertips and where there's one primary goal, becoming your highest self. If this has been something you're looking for, join us and be a part of the growth. You can find out more information on MacyRenee.com.